And we're back.
Back again.
So, how are you doing, Laith?
Good, Namir. How are you?
I'm well. Really excited. Today we have. I was saving this. I was going to call you the godmother of podcasting for the region.
Whoa.
You like that, right? I'm sure you haven't heard that one yet.
I have not heard that one.
We have Hiba Fisher joining us from Seattle. It's really amazing. Hiba started the Kerning Cultures Network. She's the first venture capitalist supported venture capital. Is that what it's called? Venture capital or venture backed network, podcast network put out in the region. She's just doing unbelievable things, and probably one of, when we started this thing, we were really looking to people in this region, and definitely Hiba, you're someone that we kind of looked towards, and we thought it was just such an amazing thing that you were able to kick it off and really build something.
I'm honored. Thank you.
You've had such a great impact on podcasting in the region. I think you've kind of made your imprint across the world as well. So I think it's just a lovely thing, and really appreciate you being here. So how's things in Seattle? Is it raining?
It is right now, actually. My dad's been staying with us for some time now, like since COVID happened. He couldn't get back to Dubai, so he he came here, and he's been teasing us, and he's like, "What the hell? This is June. Like, what is this weather?" Which I don't know. But on most days are quite beautiful, but right now it is raining, so it fulfills the stereotype. Yes.
Would you take the rain over the summer heat in Dubai?
لا أبدا. No,
that's what I was thinking.
I prefer the sun.
Oh, no way.
Oh
no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
No. I would take the rain. I would take the rain over the 50-degree melting weather that we're in right now. So now just to kick it off. So as you said, so your parents or your father kind of goes back and forth. Is that what it is between Dubai and Seattle, or he's just visiting and just spends majority of his time here?
He goes between Jeddah and Dubai. He's just visiting. COVID has changed a lot of things and made things a little bit harder, and so he's here with us, which is awesome. And I go between Seattle and Dubai. Before COVID, I used to go every 6 weeks. So I'll tell you my life story. So my family and company are in Dubai, and then my husband is here in Seattle. So that's the insane back and forth, which worked really well. And now everybody is grounded, which is fine. It's actually been quite nice to be in the same spot for, a couple weeks, which is good.
Yeah, for sure. We were talking about it. We've been talking about it with the guests, obviously, since we started this podcast during the whole COVID times. And we've just been saying there's definitely the negative impacts, the being locked up, the fear and the unknown around COVID. But at the same time, there's the positives, which is one, you get to spend a lot of time with your family and friends.
Quality time.
The second is it allows you to pick up new habits or kind of create or build on or try new things that you haven't tried, i.e. the podcast. Our case. So it's been really good. And I've been trying to do as much reading as possible. So how have you been spending your time? Has it impacted Kerning Culture's, let's say, schedule or what you guys had planned to do?
So our team, we're 12, and we're scattered across 7 cities, 5 time zones. It's a little bit of an insane operation that works for us, alhamdulillah. And so we're already remote from the beginning, and so we were very well prepared as a team for handling, working from home and and being distanced from each other. From a company perspective, we've grown like crazy, which is awesome. So podcasting, just like you guys started a podcast in the time of Corona, a lot of listeners are discovering the medium because of COVID, because you have a lot more time on your hands. You're looking for ways to entertain yourself, and also screen exhaustion is real. And so being able to stimulate.
Yeah, it's a real deal. I'm over it. I'm really trying to schedule my daily interaction with the screen because it's just...
It consumes you.
It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. So now I think it's a good point, or it's a good starting point. Now let's just kind of take it back and say, how did you get into this? So I know you were involved in startups. You prior to starting Kerning Cultures. So, kind of guide us through the life of Hiba to this point. How did you get here?
So we started Kerning Cultures a little over 5 years ago. And prior to that, I actually didn't have a background in media or journalism. So I studied what was basically anthropology, which you might argue actually makes me a very good interviewer. But had nothing to do with media. And my passion coming out of university was microfinance and supporting small businesses. And so that's where the real interest in entrepreneurship came about. And Kerning Cultures is actually my third company. But it was really, it's still hard. And certainly in the beginning, it was very, very hard to learn how to tell a story well, because I had never done that outside of like grade school assignments, creative writing assignments or whatever it might be. I'd never really created a story before. And so when we started, it was really trial and error. And like if you listen to so we started with the Kerning Culture show, or our flagship show. And sometimes when I listen back to the earlier episodes, it's
cringeworthy. Is that how you look at it?
It's cringeworthy. It's really cringeworthy. And I'm really, really proud of the quality of the storytelling that we produce at now. But I would say it probably took us 3.5 years to get good at learning how to tell stories with sound. Because the other thing is, when we started KC, there were only a handful of other podcasts across the entire region. Like I think we were one of maybe like 20 shows that like ever existed, and some had been started like way like back in 2006 when we launched in 2015, and had been inactive for like 10 years. And so there really weren't examples around us that we could model ourselves after, or people that we could knock on their doors to learn from. And so we had to look internationally for that kind of inspiration, and then also just like figure it out ourselves. But alhamdulillah, like we have an amazing team. Everybody who's been a part of Kerning Cultures had some storytelling background in some shape or form. So a lot of the times they would be videographers or photographers or print journalists. And so the skill set is there. It's just a matter of adapting it to audio, which has its own kind of finesse. So that's a little bit of the backstory.
Interesting, because obviously there's some like basic lessons that we've kind of encountered, and you continue to encounter when you talk to entrepreneurs, when you talk to business owners, people that are successful. And I'm always I try to be very clear about success doesn't necessarily translate to money. I think success is just kind of really understanding your place and really kind of doing your craft to the best of your ability and really kind of evolving. But what would you tell like all of the creators out there, whether it's podcasters, YouTubers, people that are just trying to put out original content, like what would be the best advice from your experience that you would share?
In terms of when you're starting to make content, start, I think, is the first thing. Like we talk a lot about analysis paralysis, right? And this idea that like things have to be perfect. And especially when you're talking about some kind of a creative expression, it's really terrifying. Like, especially for me, not having a background in media before Kerning Cultures. I remember the first episode we published, I was so nervous because it was like the first public exhibition of like my heart, right? Because it's your voice, it's the way that you see the world. A lot of that is just completely, imbued in what you're producing, and so that's terrifying. But so like I think it's very easy when you're in that space to want to perfect it until it's absolutely like flawless and then to release it. But by then you probably would have you probably would have spent like 3 years or I don't know, however long before you actually put out your first piece. Whereas content creators, like you're going to continue to get better. And so my advice to any regardless of the medium, is to just start and really engage your audience. And that was something that we were really intentional about from the beginning was, every episode we would send out to friends and family, the growing network of listeners who did not know us actually, and ask for feedback and be really, really encouraging for people to give us critical feedback. And then we would, incorporate that those opinions into what we did next. And that's how we got better and better.
Was it challenging to get that critical feedback or the tough feedback to people that don't enjoy it? Because we're still kind of building up our skin right now as we're doing this. Me and there are moments where I do sit in the corner and cry myself to sleep, but for the most part, but yeah, like, was it challenging? Because I get that. I understand that very well. We're right in the starting phase. It's so personal, right? You're putting yourself out there in such a big way. So was that challenging? Like, how did you cope with it?
I think your perspective on feedback that comes through, like, you just have to be, you have to grow thick skin for sure in any sort of public sphere. I think you need to just have that. But then the second thing is they say that you actually shouldn't listen to every single piece of feedback. You should listen to the most repetitive pieces and the loudest pieces. And then obviously, like, this is yours at the end of the day. So you get to decide what you want to do with it and how it wants to sound. And so I think, like, I personally try to engage with every listener who, and we, like, now, alhamdulillah, I mean, we're quite big as a network and we're continuing to grow really fast. And so we have like dozens of listeners who message us on a daily basis. And sometimes it's with like essays of, how our episodes have made them feel. And sometimes it's with essays of like points of criticism of like, hey, like, you're the standard of good storytelling in the Arab world. Like, you need to do better about this, or, whatever it might be. And we like really, we take every single message to heart and we try to answer, we do answer every message that comes through. And sometimes we decide to change things and sometimes we don't, because at the end of the day, like, we get to decide. We're the ones putting in the time and the effort, But I would say, like, it is a matter for sure of growing a thick skin, and then also like just being smart about what feedback you listen to. You don't have to listen to everything, like we had somebody message in, and this was really hard for me to take. Somebody messaged in and they were like, hey, I love your show, but the host, her voice is like terrible. And that's me, right? Like, I was the host and they said it's like a fake American accent. And I'm like, dude, I went to like American schools. Like, how am I supposed to change my voice? Like, like, I know, but there's some stuff that, like, yeah, of course it like hits you, but like at the end of the day, like, I don't know what to do with that. I'm just gonna put it in a box and hopefully forget it happened.
Yeah. Go for it, Liz.
It's pretty interesting. So somebody like you've been doing it for 3 years, 5 years, I think longer than that. I'm always intrigued or interested in knowing, at the very start, you're so anxious to start. You have all this drive, you have all these thoughts, all these topics that you want to talk about, but you get to a point where you feel like you're running out of steam. How does the creative process come in, working in that environment and coming up with new topics, stuff that you look at as things that you relate to, or is it something that's in the pop culture? Like, what drives most of the topics that you put out there?
Well, let me take a step back and maybe explain a bit about the Kerning Cultures Network. So we currently have 7 shows, 5 in Arabic, 2 in English, and we produce what we call immersive podcasts for the curious listener. And so it's very, a lot of documentary, long form style production. It's multiple interviews woven with host narration. There's sound design, there's music, like it's a proper film in your ear style of production. And in terms of like figuring out what kind of episodes to produce, so we're a decently sized team now. I think we're like 9 producers, full-time and part-time. And so one is just like the sheer size of that, right? Is that like, if you have no idea, somebody else is going to have another idea. The other piece is that every episode we produce, we try to strive for this standard. Is it's always starting from a place where a producer is like completely obsessed. So like they can't stop thinking about this particular thing or this particular story. They want to understand this. Like every episode is always our attempt at really trying to better understand the way the world works in a certain way, whether it's like how, you know, how does this successful comedian, how did they get to where they were? Or it's, you know, how has a mother really handled, you know, having her child develop autism at a very young age, and like how has she been able to handle that? How has he been able to handle that? So it's always really born out of like this question. It always starts with a question, and those questions are either because the producer's obsessed with it, or it's something that a listener has pitched us. It's something that we've like read in an article, or we had in conversations with friends, and we use Slack for internal comms as a team. And so we have a channel on Slack labeled Pitches, where people are always just dropping in ideas for stories. And there's like a million ideas in there that we're probably never gonna get to, but it's just being able to capture them in some place is really helpful, because when we are trying to brainstorm and we can't think of anything, like that's a list that we can go through and be like, oh, like actually that would be a really great idea for us to produce a story around.
That's really interesting. So you do take in the comments or the suggestions from your listeners. So it is part of that process.
Yeah, 100%.
Such an amazing thing. Yeah, like again, I have like a million questions, right? Obviously, and it's a lot of it is driven out of selfish want. You know what I mean? That process of really taking your podcast from an idea or just a passion or a hobby and transforming it into a business. Like how maybe is the question. I was trying to think of a really clever way to kind of structure that, but I think just how, like, just give us the guidance. Like, how did that process go? Going to pitch it and trying to get people here in this region. I don't know if you got your funding from this region or from outside. How are you able to convince them that this is something worth investing in? Like, how did that process go? So I'm so intrigued.
Well, so my co-founder Razan and Zayani and I, we invested our savings in Kerning Cultures at the start, and so that's like how we were able to begin. Frankly, is neither she nor I took a salary for a long time, and we used the modest savings that we had to hire some people to help in terms of production, because doing production with a volunteer team, which we also tried, is extremely hard. Like you can't, like that'll only really get you so far. And then when we started to sell advertisements, that started to like help actually cover some of the costs of production. I would say the first big step for us was we went through an accelerator program in San Francisco called Matter. It's one of the few programs in the world that I know of that actually supports media companies, because most accelerators and incubators are looking for your traditional tech platform. And so that was, I would say, the first turning point for us, because on the back of what they call the demo day, which is after the program, you pitched your company to a room full of potential investors. After the demo day, actually it took us 8 months, but we were at least prepared and knew how to pitch properly to raise our seed round. And so we closed our seed round a little over a year ago, making Kerning Cultures the first, and to this day, only venture-backed podcast company in the Middle East, which is a huge signal for the industry. And we raised from VCs in Dubai, and then a couple of angel investors across the region, and then one other institutional investor in the US. And it's an American fund called Pod Fund that invests in podcast companies, which is really handy. And how we did all of that, it was really hard, frankly, and it took a long time. So if I can kind of map the trajectory, so we launched our first episode ever of the Kerning Cultures Network in September of 2015. We went through Matter in February 2018. So that was like almost 3 years basically before we had our first, they also wrote a $50,000 US check. And so that was like our first outside investment. And then we closed our seed round about 8 months after that. So like it took about 4 years, I think, before I would say that like we turned it into a business. And then, of course, having investment capital made it a lot, like it gave us a breathing room where we could focus on just building out our audience, and we weren't so desperate to like cover the costs, month over month, because we had this buffer. So, and of course, that just helps in terms of being able to scale the company.
Wow. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's really cool. So, because I'm just trying to think, as you said, we're going to have a venture capitalist come on next week.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the questions, is that, as you said, traditionally venture capitalists are always looking towards tech, the traditional kind of things, and media is kind of, especially in this region, it's kind of has like almost like a taboo kind of perspective around that. Did you encounter any of that? Like, if I'm gonna just sit and just say it like openly and honestly. So one, you kind of hit some stereotypes, like general taboo stereotypes for this region, the Arab world, right? You're a woman, you're successful, you're eloquent. No, seriously, you're successful, you're eloquent, and you're doing something in media. Like, it's just a whole bunch of like things that you're working against, let's say traditionally what we would consider as against in this region. Like, again, it's like it comes back to that how question, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, where did you build that motivation? Where did you build that drive? How did you get that focus? How did you navigate the sea of challenges? And what drove you to wake up every day and kind of fight that? You know what I mean? Is it success? Is it financial success? Is it fame? What is it? What was that obsessive drive?
I think the obsessive drive comes out of the fact that as a region, we don't do a good enough job telling our stories. And I'm a mutt. I'm half Egyptian, half American. And I think a byproduct of that is like having an American father and an Egyptian mother, and the two families who are very different culturally. I think one of the ways that you bridge some of those gaps is through telling stories. And I certainly grew up in a household where both of my parents are such good. They're said like you sit at their feet kind of as they orate these long stories, kind of storytellers. And so that's always just, I think, been a part of me and my soul and what I gravitate towards. And turning on the radio in Dubai, and I'm sure you can attest to this, it's so bad. And it's painful, and we can do so much better, right? We can do so much better. And we're an extremely young population, right? 140 million people between the ages of 15 and 35 across the Middle East and North Africa. That's a huge population of people who don't have media to turn to where they can actually feel like it resonates with them, where they can see themselves in it. And that causes actually a lot of like existential crises. Like, and certainly I experienced that, and sometimes still continue, where, you look at the prevailing narratives around you and none of it looks like you. And so it starts to question like who you are and what is valuable and all these things. And so, and the part that used to drive me crazy is that it's not for lack of these stories existing. It's just nobody who's making media in the region cares, right? I used to manage an incubator for startups in Dubai, and I would meet entrepreneurs, hundreds of entrepreneurs on a daily basis, and their stories are freaking incredible. And you never see any of that on the radio or on TV or in any of the magazines. So that's really where the idea of Kerning Cultures came out of, was this, like, we can produce amazing stories that get people to laugh and to cry and to feel a little closer together at the end of the day. So when you're talking about drive, I mean, that's where it's really come from. In terms of like all the boxes of, being female and Arab and a media company and trying to raise investment capital and all this stuff. I can't tell you anything else except that it was hard. And it's really a volumes game. That's my perspective of raising money now, is I think in many ways it's like finding a husband or a boyfriend, right? It comes down to compatibility. It comes down to the chemistry that you have with this person. And I have a long list we're actually raising again. I have a long list of investors that you speak with. And a lot of the times, their thesis is that they invest in ed tech or fintech or health tech. And it's only like one investor repeatedly over the years has told me, we don't invest in content. We only invest in the platform. And And that's totally fine. And that's the way that you see the world. I see the world in a different way. I see the world where Spotify just paid Joe Rogan $100 million for a licensing deal. I see a world where Spotify just bought Gimlet Media, an American podcast company that had been operating for 5 years, raised $28 million in VC funding, and they bought them 5 years later for $230 million. Like, content is absolutely a profitable space. And it's because you're creating this incredible relationship with your audience, where as a listener, like, I feel like I actually know you. Like, as the host, I feel like I know you. You are this, adornments to how I cook and how I exercise. And when I'm doing the most boring things in my life, I can't wait for you to transform these moments for me and take me into these story worlds. And we're also the people who listen to podcasts, which I'm sure you guys know, we're typically young, we're educated, and we're affluent. Like, this is like the cream of the cream to monetize off of. So I like, some investors see it and some don't. Yeah.
and very loyal. Like, I think that's one of the things that people don't appreciate, or they're starting to appreciate. And this is where the value is, that you have people that are listening to podcasts are like almost religious fervor towards the podcast that they follow, right? They sit and they listen from start to finish. Whatever is being put out, you put out. And we experienced that. And you touched about Joe Rogan. And I think I could imagine like half the podcasters in this world, especially the male podcasters, I would imagine, are kind of trying to emulate and trying to kind of be like him. But that's exactly what it is. And I think you just projected it in such a perfect way, which is that connection, that feeling that you know that person and you connect with them. And I think it's such an amazing platform because it creates that. You know what I mean? And I think I don't know. And I've researched and I've looked into Kerning Cultures. Are you guys looking to do more visuals with your audio? Is this something that you are slowly integrating into, or is that something that you're not really focused on moving forward?
So I think we are keen on building out more of a visual component. We're never going to become a video company. We'll always be an audio first company. And so the video is always just going to supplement and drive traffic to the audio. I know that you guys have the two, you have the video and the audio component, which I think is really, really clever, especially given how prevalent YouTube is in the region as well, in terms of, and it's really going to help with search as well. I think for us, I don't see a show that we're working on in the future where there's going to be like a video recording alongside the audio recording, but we are trying to get a lot more creative with having photography accompanying episodes. We do these little audio teasers. We're doing like little videos, and listeners love the behind the scenes. And so we're trying to be more mindful of that, of like capturing more of the behind the scenes. And by the way, like all of our producers, I mean, sometimes we'll record in fancy studios, but a lot of the times we're recording in our closets and under like botaneya, and listeners love to see that, like it humanizes things a lot more, I mean, like I'm sitting on my living room floor right now, so you'll see the way.
It feels like you're sitting with us. That's why I'm like, I'm really enjoying it. Like,
but there's something about, what I like about your show. There's something about producing an audio with some immersion in it. It gives you there's that feeling that you get out of it that you will never get from a video production. And that's something you've touched on, something that's very niche and not a lot of people are doing in such good quality. And that's something I don't think video can replicate at all.
Yeah, I think your senses, right, will overtake it. Your eyes.
But it just expands your imagination to something bigger. You're not locked within this frame screen, and it's just your mind and your ears, and it expands, where the storytelling and the sound effects and the layering and the sound engineering can play such a tremendous artistic effect to the listener.
I heard a voice actor say this once, and it really stuck with me. And he said, if I wanted to, you guys know the film Avatar?
Did you watch it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. James Cameron, good Canadian.
So,
got it.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So a film like that, which I don't even know what the budget was, hundreds of millions of dollars of CGI and graphics and, all of that to create that kind of a story world, which was beautiful and stunning and, won awards, but hundreds of millions of dollars of a budget. As a voice actor or with a podcast, I just need to use my voice, right? I need to use my voice. I need to narrate a little. I put a little bit of sound effects, and then your imagination is going to fill in all those details. And I bet you that the world that you imagine in your head as the scene of this podcast is going to be even more powerful than what you could have seen on a video. So 100%. I mean, and to be able to stimulate that, it's like it's magic.
Word I was thinking about.
Wow. You guys just blew my mind. I'm taking a step back now and kind of just absorbing that. No, honestly, because it was like,
we need to work on our audio.
That's so deep. No, seriously, we do need to work on our audio. We need to put like crazy special effects, like weird, like soothing sounds to get people all feeling comfortable.
But going back to what you were saying, you kind of said a term which kind of resonated with me a bit when you said mutt. I don't take any offense to that. In fact, you know, I like to elaborate on it. I think there's something cool about that where I look at us as hybrids. I mean, both parents are from Iraq, born in Abu Dhabi. Half of my life lived in Abu Dhabi, then the other half lived in Canada. So I've always, you can say I wouldn't say an identity crisis, but it's like, okay, am I Iraqi or am I Canadian or am I Khaliji, or there's no thing that you can point on. And I've always looked at it as like, okay, I'm kind of like, I don't really have a place to call home. Sad old me. But as I matured, as I grew up, I looked at it and I'm like, actually, that's an advantage because I have a perspective that a lot of people don't have. And I can relate to a lot more people that people can't relate to. And this is something that's definitely helping me with my podcast, with my work, with my personal life, that I think a lot of people don't realize. And it's not expressed a lot in media. Like people don't touch on that and they don't speak about it. There's
one of my favorite podcasters of life, who's a Lebanese American, Jad Abu Murad of Radiolab. I had the honor of interviewing him for one of our shows, and he said something that I take very much to heart. So he's also a hybrid, right? Lebanese American, and he says that actually that's exactly the skill set that you need for being a good storyteller and for being a good journalist, because you're straddling two worlds, and so you're not really from someplace and you're not really from someplace else, but you're from somewhere enough that you can empathize and get close to, but you're not too deep into it that you can't see the forest for the trees, right? So like I think it's a skill. And I mean, I also think that hybrids are the answer to world peace, because we're
smashing stereotypes.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's such an amazing thing. And for you, like now I'm gonna kind of hit on Hiba as a person. Like you grew up where? You grew up in Seattle or in the US, or you grew up here in Dubai, or what was it? Like what created this creature that we're talking to right now?
We moved around a lot growing up. So I was born in the States, and then we moved to. I did middle school in Jeddah. I did high school in Bahrain. I came back to the States for college, and then my family's been in Dubai for about 9 years. And then I've been bouncing between Seattle and Dubai since I got married 4 years ago. So it's home is where your family is for me.
So Bahrain, you just touched on a place that's very close to me. Like I lived in Bahrain now for the last, up until I moved full time. So 2005, when I moved back to the region, I came to Bahrain and I was there. My father had been in and out of Bahrain for such a long time. And I was wondering, when you said your partner,
who's over there, by the way, about to make coffee. You might hear his coffee machine going.
Well, your co-founder, Zayani.
Yes, she's Bahraini. She's Emirati, but originally Bahraini. Yes.
Yeah, because obviously I know a few Zayanis along the way. So Chico's restaurant. Shout out to Chico's restaurant. If you're ever in Bahrain, you gotta check out Chico's restaurant. Ali Zayani, beautiful place. So I just gave a shameless plug to a place that I like to eat. But so amazing, like it's so true. Like and I'm putting us, we're all in this bucket, right? We all have this experience of we are something and we are something of that as well, and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And like you said, it gives so much perspective and it allows us to empathize and at the same time not feel so committed where we're unwilling to accept even criticism, right? Like I don't mind. I don't know why people are so sensitive about that. Like, why are people so sensitive about criticizing themselves? I think you learn from criticism, and I want to take it back to what you said, right? I'm assuming some of the best lessons I've had in life has come from criticism, from the ability to kind of look at myself and not take myself so seriously. You know what I mean? So I think it's so important. We really, especially at this time, man. And I was talking to you earlier before we started this, and I was asking you about all that's going on in the US. You know, it's such a crazy thing, but such an inspirational thing at the same time. Like, I think it's something that is forcing a conversation that needs to happen, right? And you're there. How's your experience with it right now? Like, you're in Seattle. Are you seeing protests? What's your experience with all of that that's happening now?
Yeah, there's a lot of protests in Seattle and a bunch of neighborhoods, and I'm actually like impressed and proud by how long they've been going on for. Like, it's been I think 12 days now, and they're still going, which is really awesome. And I think it's a conversation that's necessary to be happening at a national level. It's necessary to be having at a global level. And I'm really pleased with how, as Arabs, we're also starting to reflect on racism within our own cultures. I think a lot of conversations have started to happen in that regard. And I'm not at all going to pretend like I'm some sort of an expert or an academic or anything. And I'm also highly conscious of, like, I'm white and blonde hair and light eyes. Like, I like freaking when we go to Egypt, my husband and I'll tell you something. So, I mean, I love Masr. I love my family so much. And I have such a beautiful time every single time we go, and whether it's a short visit or a longer visit. And it was only when I got married, that I realized that my experience of Egypt is very singular. And it's because I'm this, like, very light-skinned, blonde-haired Masriya walking through the streets. It's very endearing, right? And so I have a very different experience than my husband, who's, he doesn't look that much different than me, but we have a very different experience, and that's just such a small shade of a distinction, I would say. So I have a very particular experience going through this world and this life, and I know I'm incredibly blessed and privileged. So I'm not going to pretend like I have any. I don't have a place really in any of these conversations except to just be reflective and recognize that and think of. Of what we can all do.
Yeah, no, and you touched on something it's so key, and we just had a conversation with a guest again, talking about all our guests that are coming, but we have a guest that's coming, Ishtar, who's like a jiu-jitsu champ, Iraqi woman, very conscious, very smart. She's based in the UAE, and she sent something. She put something out on Instagram about racism in Iraq, right? And it was such a weird experience for me, because it was like in a kind of in a twisted way. I had this like vision where I was like, everything is fine, and we relate to that, and we would never do that. And then you see the reality, right? And it just kind of hits you in the face. And maybe my experience wasn't like that. We were very fortunate with our parents. Very open, never kind of had these weird predispositions. But that doesn't mean I didn't see it, and it doesn't mean that it's not there. And it kind of shoved me off this kind of pedestal where I felt like, we don't do that, and we don't have that issue.
I'd have to disagree with you. Yeah, 100%. Growing up, and it's not only my family, every Iraqi Arab family that I know. See, the thing is, the racism that we have in our culture is a different type of racism.
Exactly.
It's not the type of racism where it's based on color. It's literally anything that they don't like, or they don't understand.
They don't understand,
or
exactly.
don't know.
True.
So if you're not from the same religion or sect or color or country or town, then you're the other. And that's something so ingrained in us. And I think that's something that as Arabs, we need to re-examine how we look. And I think this new generation is more awake about these things, where they recognize these things and they're willing to change the perspective. Yes, it's different racism. It's not as bad as discriminating in the workplace or, in social life, but it's there. It's kind of under the surface.
It is under the surface.
And we shy from it so easily.
I agree with you. And I think, look, where I'm coming from, the reason why I said I come out kind of kicked me off my pedestal was in my mind, I never had that experience. Like I never processed, and that's just me as a person.
Yeah,
like I don't know.
Too.
I can't.
Me
you know
too.
what I mean?
Me too,
and maybe you're right. It is there, and it's, like obviously it's there, right? And this is what I mean is that what she sent out, when she put out, really, like I said, kind of smashed me in the face. But I don't know, man. It's just really weird. Like to really encounter that or to kind of really address that. I think it's really important. And that's why I just kind of went on a little bit of a tangent, but like with all that's happening now in terms of fueling, and now I'm going to bring it back to you, like fueling future content. Is that something that, have you addressed that before? Or is that something that you plan to address now that it's become so much in the forefront of what everyone's talking about? Do you think, is that something that you guys are having conversations around?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've over the years, we actually produced a bunch of episodes and then we never published them, where we wanted to do a mini series on race across the Arab world, that we're now revisiting and figuring out what from it we could adapt. We're commissioning a couple of producers to try to do some really fast turnaround episodes looking at race as well, both for our English and our Arabic shows. And one of the other sort of, so I don't, we're 12 people on our team. I don't think any one of us would identify as being Black. And so that's also a space that we're trying to be more intentional about. Like we've worked with producers who would identify as being Black in the past, but nobody's a mainstay on our team. And so I think being more conscious of that moving forward, and also doing it in such a way that there's a ton of exceptionally talented storytellers. And so I think we've been trying to be intentional about getting producers from a lot of different kinds of countries. And all of us, I think one of the beautiful things about the Kerning Cultures team is we're very, very mixed in terms of background and beliefs and even places where we're based. And so I think we can always be doing better. I think there's that. So I think in terms of content, it is something that we're trying to be more conscious of. I'd like to think that we're pretty conscious as a team in general, the kind of content that we cover, the kinds of stories that we cover, the kind of countries that we try to produce from. This has always been part of our the fiber of who we are. But I think global conversations are just reminding us that we can always be doing a lot more. So yeah. I want to, and I don't want to necessarily dominate the conversation with this piece, but one thing I want to just...
You are the reason why we're having this piece, right? So dominate, please.
No. Well, just one thought from Laith, what you said of this kind of racism happens under the surface. I actually think that's the problem, is that it doesn't happen under the surface. I think it happens right out in the open, and I think we've normalized it. I think that's the problem. I think that would be the main, coming back and forth between a country like the US, which is everything has to be politically correct. And I think people are so scared of offending people that all of this is just sort of swept under the surface. Whereas I think in the Middle East, I think that we don't care about offending anybody. And all this stuff is just out in the open. And I think both are a problem, right? Because we've normalized these kinds of conversations. We've normalized just calling somebody abds and making it a joke. But it's not a joke, right? And so I think there's different problems to be dealt with, but and they're different. The problems are different as well. That's one observation I think that I've been kind of reflecting on, is that it's in some ways the conversations about race in the Middle East are even harder to be had because it's already it's so much a part of how we interact with one another. Like it's already built in.
No, that's a very.
I struggle with some of the vocabulary some of our elders use.
Yeah,
where it's not even
that's
not
true.
even racist.
That's
like I can tell, you have the purest, most kind-hearted woman, grandmother, and some of the terms she uses, not necessarily she's racist, but the way she grew up, there is no other term like the term abid for them to describe a person with dark color.
Yeah.
And when you try to explain it to them, it's like it's difficult to change that mindset. And I think that's the awakening that's happening, where it's like, no, we have to find something else.
Yeah, and just for our English listeners, just so we kind of show that impact, that word abid translated essentially means slave, right? Which is just, it's wild when you
Horrible.
step back and you hear it, right? When you really want to address it. And this is what I mean when you want to come have it's ridiculous. But coming back and it's kind of ties in all together, right? And when you decided to do Kerning Cultures, who are you speaking to? Are you speaking to the West, or are you speaking to the population here? Who's your audience?
Yeah. So it's always been, we're creating content for ourselves. And when we started the first show, the Kerning Culture show, was in English, predominantly English. We did a couple of experiments with Arabic episodes that actually performed better than the English ones, which was an indication that we had to start producing programs in Arabic. But it's always been, we've always been producing stories for ourselves. I think the fact that we have shows in English has opened us up to a non-Middle Eastern audience looking to better understand the region. And we are always getting letters from listeners of like how, I actually, one of the most extraordinary ones that came in was somebody who messaged to say, I knew nothing about the Middle East. And after listening to your stories, I just sold my motorcycle to fund a plane ticket to visit Casablanca, to visit the Middle East for the first time. This was, it's incredible to start to be hearing those kinds of things from our audience. And so I think we're starting to be a bit more conscious of who else is listening. I think I would say that. I don't think that we're ever gonna tailor our content and the editorial decisions that we make such that we're creating content for like a non-Middle Eastern audience, because that just defeats the whole purpose of what we're doing. But we are conscious of there's different categories of people who are listening, and they're listening to us for different reasons. But at the heart, always, whether it's Bihub or Jasadi or Sukoon or any of the shows that we have, it's always like we're producing content for ourselves, because that's first and foremost what's driving us.
Because that was the question that I was going to say, is that do you feel pressure to put out content or to shape content in that regard? But you just answered that, and I think that should be the way forward, is that you should just say, and this is again what we're trying to do, is just say what's there and try not to filter, address the bad and the good, and try to learn, right? And this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to build ourselves as human beings and hopefully take our audience with us on this journey, right, of talking to amazing people such as yourself. So
seeking advice from the godmother of podcasting. So if somebody like
trademark, you got to trademark that. But we have this recorded. Don't try to take that from me, okay? I have this recorded, guys. I got this recorded.
Somebody like us, or somebody that's entering this new realm, where you have investors, be it VCs or any type of external funding that's coming in. How do you manage expectations in terms of who controls the content and how does the content come out? Do they give you the full freedom, or is that something that is put in part of the negotiation where, no, we need to screen everything that comes out, or listen, we give you the freedom? How does that conversation go about?
So in terms of who controls the content, so 100%, we will always retain editorial control over all of our stuff. I mean, that's just journalism practice. Like, listeners will not trust us if somebody else gets a say in what we put out. And so all of our investors know that from the get-go. Like that's never even on the table as part of a conversation. And all of our investors, alhamdulillah, I mean, they're wonderful allies. They're very supportive. And the reason that they've invested in us is because they trust that we know how to produce the kind of content that really resonates with audiences and that will continue to grow our audience and make them lots of money. So it's that's never on the table.
Amazing.
Well, look, on that note, we know you got to run. Now you've just, we'd love to just keep talking to you and hopefully we can get you on.
Me too. But God, this has been really enjoyable. I hope inshallah we'll get to grab a coffee in real life.
I hope so. And when you get to travel, hopefully we'll get a chance to meet you in real life and kind of touch and make sure you're a real person, that you really exist. But honestly, thank you so much for joining us. Hibba Fisher, the co-founder of Kerning Cultures. It's an amazing thing. We'll put all the details. Definitely is going to be there for all of you guys to check it out. It's really beautiful stuff. And as usual, for us, as we're trying to build ourselves, please like, share, tell your moms, tell your fathers, tell their friends. And thank you for joining us today, man. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Hibba.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yalla, bye.